Now, welcome, Heiko. He brings us the CGN topic a bit closer, which is not new, but I guess will stick around quite some time still. Where are you? Here, sorry, a second. Stage is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I want to ask you about these bottles. Because they are outside, we have a lot of them. Please take everybody a bottle. Because my brother in crime, who take a picture right now of me, picked me up with his car from Cologne and brought me to in Frankfurt. And the trunk full of these bottles, 150 pieces. But there are two things we didn't consider. The customs. We had some discussion on Google, how much is the value, and the Gurten. We have to bring it here. So somebody of you joined us this morning with the big boxes where we have to put it in the Gurtenbahn and bring it to this. So please take everybody one. Maybe you have family members or something like this. If you have daughters like my daughter, yeah. But it's a nice one, really a nice one. My daughter already took 5 of them and lost them somewhere. So please take it. So let's start with my presentation. First of all, I have some private question about you. Who of you is older than 43? 40, 50%. Congratulations, you are older than IP version 4. Because maybe some of you already know my slide. I took only 2 slides of my presentation of 2019, and just to make it more visible, IP version 4 was introduced in 1981, and at this time, as a German, I have to map it to Volkswagen Golf. So this was at the time Volkswagen Golf 1, and at 83. It was a single protocol for the ARPANET, so it was a time of Volkswagen 2. So these cars are 40 years old already, only to keep in mind. On the other hand, IP version 6, a lot of people already say it's still a new protocol, was introduced in 98, the official publish. And this was the time of the Volkswagen Golf number 3. Now we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and even we have the E models and the ID3 at the moment. So only to keep in mind. But if you look at 1995, what happens now? I took also some pictures, and this is a graph of Google, which Google provides you regarding the usage of IP version 6, and I took it beginning of September. And last week I've been at my holiday house in east of Frisia and bought me a new Samsung TV. I want to set up because I want to watch Netflix, and the stamp TV doesn't support IP version 6. It supports all this smart stuff, all this Amazon Prime, Netflix, all what you need, everything is really internet driven. It doesn't support IP version 6. It's got 4K, all this fancy stuff, but no IP version 6. Maybe it's too complicated, but it's finally still supports IP version 4. So from my understanding, IP version 4, which is already 43 years old, has a birthday September also, so we are really at 43 years. Will still stay with us for next couple of years at least, or decades. I don't know exactly what happens if all these smart things. And for this, we have to think about IP preservation or migration strategies. So I put the most common one at the slide because you have different ways how to overcome this obstacle of the shortness of IP version 4 addresses. The first one is a classical carrier grade NAT, CGN, NAT 44 or 444, depending on your setup. But there are also some other versions like 6 rapid deployment And let me also highlight one another is DS Lite. It's the second lowest one because NAT44 and DS Lite are in core Europe, the region where I'm responsible for, are the most common used protocols for carrier grade NAT or for IP4 preservation, because DS Lite is at the end of the day NAT44, but the traffic from the client, from the modem, is carried in the IP version 6 tunnel only. And then it will be done NAT44. And the others are also sometime in place, but not everywhere. There are a lot of stateless technologies like MAP-T, these mapping technologies where you map one IP address in another. But the end of the day, you want to save or preserve your IP version 4 addresses. That is the main target. I don't want to talk too much about this because I just pick some tricky points which you should consider if we talk about carrier grade NAT itself. One is, first of all, the preservation and the NAT44, the carrier grade NAT. And this allows us for oversubscribing. This is the main part. You want to gain something at the end of the day. And it has some kind of functionality for fair share, for fair usage. And here are some points you should consider about carrier grade NAT. One is a trivial one, that you have sticky NAT. That the subscriber, that the customer always get NATed to the same IP address, to the public IP address. Because what happens in the beginning of network translation with the old Cisco ASA firewall or the first Juniper, they provide, one customer is clicking a website for the first TCP session, it get out of this IP address a port. For the next IP address, it get out of this IP address a port. Then it went to another page, and the IP address already was occupied. All 65,000 ports are done. It switched to another IP address. And what happened in this beginning, as this cookies was not available, is a typical web shop basket problem. You collect a product, put it in your basket. You collect another product, browsing, put it in your basket. Then you want to pay, and in this moment, maybe you get another IP, and the subscribers are, wow, my basket is empty. Now all the web shops solved this issue with cookies, with HTTP cookies and in the header and stuff. But in the beginning, this was a big problem, that you have different IP address. So it sounds really trivial, but it's really important that you have sticky NAT, that you always get a subscriber with a modem, that they get the same public IP address as long as they're online. This is one point. User quotas. You have to limit the user because you want to oversubscribe a public IP address. Your goal is at the end of the day to migrate a lot of 64 or how many customers to a public IP address, because not everybody is online and somebody is just using a high bandwidth service but without amount of ports, TCP or UDP ports. So first of all is that you have some kind of user quotas. Because what we see in typical service provider employment, even if I provide 10,000 TCP ports or even the 65, there are always some subscriber consuming all the ports. And this is one-to-one NAT, so I can provide them public IP. And usually, these are the gamers, or these are the one who have been infected. They get some bad software where you see a huge amount of DNS requests before they send out spam or something, if you are infected with spam. So you have to limit on a really number port space that they only use this port. They can oversubscribe it by session. They can use it, I will have it later in something, but you have to provide user quotas because you want to have a fair share and you want to provide for every subscriber the same service. It should be, because most of subscriber, everybody here in the room knows there's some IP address, there's something go behind the network. So most people outside just ask, what is your Wi-Fi code? They don't care about technology behind. They just want to use Netflix, they want to use a service, they want to use Amazon for shopping, they don't really care what happens in the background. Is this Wi-Fi 6? Is this IP version 6? Is this IP version 4? They just want to use service. It should work. They don't care about technology. Everything is too complicated. Like everybody who is married knows the issue. If something is wrong with your network, who is the guilty one? You. Another really important thing you have to consider if we talk about carrier grade NAT is endpoint independent filtering and endpoint independent mapping. There are also standards for this. Because compared to traditional NAT from your local modem, you also want to have that connection could be established from the internet to you. And that means, first of all, endpoint independent mapping means if you have the same source port from your client, from the private IP address space, also use the same source port, it could be a different value, on the NAT IP, on the public IP. So if I have two different target IP address, but I use the same source port from my side, it also uses the same source port on the public IP address to communicate these services. This called endpoint independent mapping. So this is especially used for peer-to-peer is a good example. What happens usually? I go to a peer-to-peer register and provide my IP address. They see only the public IP address and my port number. And then the next point comes with endpoint independent filtering. They use the source port I announced, and with this it is open that somebody could address this port from outside to this NAT IP address. And this is called also full cone. A lot of other vendors call it full cone. Officially, the wording is endpoint independent mapping, endpoint independent filtering for this stuff. And this is really important. And also you have to adjust timers. After somebody opened a session, how long should it be open for connection from outside? Because it shouldn't be too long, but it also should not be too short about this, especially if you use peer-to-peer services, gaming services, because this is really important that all this service will work. As I mentioned, nobody cares about if you use carrier grade NAT or not. Standard people, not you. But the service should work at the end of the day. The next point is hairpinning. Hairpinning is also a typical example. For example, there are two kids going home from school and say, do we play a game later? You against me, something, via web. That means there's a good chance if they, at the same street, for example, in the neighborhood, they're playing against and use the same service provider, that they're in the same IP space. That means this client and that client belong to this service provider, belong to this network, and want to play against each other. But they use a public IP address for announcement for the gaming server. So if you see, for example, A originated, the host B originated the session, and it takes the public IP address and port range of host A. And that means that the CGN solution must recognize, okay, this public IP address is already on my box configured, not that I have some kind of endless looping there, and map it to the right subscriber. So that it doesn't even go outside of the CGN, going back to the subscriber itself. Because this is really important, it looks like a rare use case, but you have to think about young gaming people or peer-to-peer. I want to share something on peer-to-peer. Do you want to download it or something strange where they want to communicate each other and they belong to the same service provider and the same network part. So hairpinning is really an important thing you should consider about the carrier grade NAT solution. NAT itself, it's not rocket science, but it's a part how you deal with carrier grade NAT at this point. And protocol port overloading. That means, due to, if you use carrier grade NAT, usually you have 65,000 ports per IP address on TCP and UDP space, and you share it across several subscribers. Typical setups is that I provide, depending on the fixed line, depending on the bandwidth, about 3096 or 4128 ports to a subscriber. These are the values, the best practice value we have for this networking part. But if they maybe open more sessions, that they can overload this protocol ports on the source part, that they have several sessions on this. This is also something CGN should support, that everything is working smoothly, because the only thing what counts is a user experience. Because as I know about, every call in a support center with all this chain behind cost about 50 euros or something like this, if you look all these people and so on, and you want to avoid calls to your support center. There, for sure, if you talk about carrier grade NAT, there are common concerns. First of all, is the transparency. If I'm transparent, maybe there's some forum in the internet where they tell I'm a dirty service provider. What about the user experience? And also resiliency. In the moment you use carrier grade NAT, you have to build resiliency. Because if one device, solution, whatever breaks down, no private IP address will be routed in the internet. So the subscriber is offline. So you have to have some kind of resiliency with session sync or with some kind of multicast stuff and so on. Next point is also logging. Because as we heard before about lawful interception, also depending on the law of different countries, they want to understand which client is behind a public IP address. But now you have maybe 32 or 64, so you have to be precise logging or understanding at which time which IP address and port was allocated. And depending on granularity, how granular I want to have my logging, via logging volume. And at the end of the day, there's also something, DDoS, like in the presentation before, is also a topic. What about blacklisting? If you have 30 subscriber, a few and maybe more of them at one IP address, you have to have some kind of multiplication in this point, especially if you talk about spammer. Application integrity is really easy. You have ALGs. CGN solution should support application layer gateways. One of the famous one is FTP, because it's easy to explain what happens. Because if a client from outside opens an FTP session, the server comes back, open a separate session for the data. And one is the control from the client to the server is control. But the server, if it doesn't have an ALG, it will discard this connection because it's from outside established. And there are all other protocols which are really important for this application that they are working. Then the logging. There are some people doing fixed NAT. Fixed NAT is a fixed allocation. So one subscriber, one house, one modem always gets the same public IP address and port range. For example, I configure that one client always get a IP address ABCD and the port range 5000 to 9000. This port range is also allocated to the client if they are away for weeks, if there's no session. This is not effective. On the other hand, I don't need any logging if logging is required. I have just a fix, I just have a file, oh, this IP address port, this subscriber. On the other hand, you can have dynamic allocation. So if, for example, if somebody is not online, then these ports can be reused for other subscribers. But you have logging, and it depends how do you want to log. Do you want to log single TCP and UDP session? You get a flood of logging information. Or you can provide port batching allocate always 64, 128 or 396 ports at once and have only a message for 128, port allocated, port range A to B, and then if it's not used for a time and timeout happens, this port batch is freed. It reduces the amount of logging messages dramatically, because we also figured out that 85% of all subscribers are just using up to 64 or 128 ports. Not everybody is a heavy user or have several gaming kits at this. And coming up to my last slide about this, because I read also the time, how do you want to implement your solution? Do you want to use classical appliance, purpose-built hardware? Some people say, yes, it's easy. Some people say, it's some proprietary stuff, this appliance. Do I want to go virtual? How do I want to scale? Do I want to use bare metal, classical software, just putting on the server? Do I want to use cloud instances, for example? Or do I want to use containers? And this is a question nobody can answer, depending on your infrastructure and depending how you want to achieve this at the end of the day. So thank you for this. Just a short overview about the more details you should consider at Carrier Grid NAT.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes, coming.
And the buttons, don't forget the buttons.
Hi, this is Nicolas Stefani from Sky Switzerland. Thanks for the reminders. I think it's always good to remind people what is behind CGNAT. I was wondering if you have any, you mentioned about transparency, and I was mentioning if actually it's good to declare to the end user or to the rest of the community that actually this IP is actually behaving as CGNAT. So for example, I didn't saw any recommendation about DNS lookup. Is it good or not to declare an IP as a CGN?
I'm not really sure. It depends on the contract and stuff. But to be honest, most of them are using CGN at the moment. And I don't know if there's something in the contract or what is the service level I provide to the subscriber. And I don't know even if they are so in details at this.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about the user side. So like you say, it's contract, but I am also thinking about the community. Somehow, you know, when we are facing an IP, if we have an abuse, it's also very good to have a declarative information, for example, in DNS lookup, mentioning that this IP, thanks to a reverse, is actually a CGN. Because then if you do a blacklisting, for example, you know that it's not only one user behind. It could be thousands of users.
Yeah, I don't know where exactly we should do this kind of announcement. Usually we are... Yeah, maybe this is a possibility that this is called as a NAT IP address. I don't saw it any service provider. I also checked, I'm as a service provider who run it, and I also checked my IP address, because if I want to do a VPN connection one-to-one, I need to understand what is my version 6 and what is my version 4 IP address. But there was no hint, not at, for example, I come from Germany at Deutsche Telekom, or as a local service provider, I got Yplay with a fiber, which offers me only IP version 4, by the way. I asked several times for IP version 6, and that's the point. They don't announce it. I think it would be a great idea to have it, especially if you have spam house or such organization, that they are more careful about these IP addresses.
Nicola, I think I got an answer for you. You've got the right database for that. Usually you record your prefix and what they are used for. In theory, I think some ISP here are using CGNAT, and they're saying, yeah, this prefix is used for CGNAT customers. And then you can see that it's probably this kind of stuff. And I think that's where we, as a community, should go and put our information for the customers and for everyone, and then tell the customer that they are using CGNAT. Maybe.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm still here for some beer, so if you have questions, come to me. Thank you.